Everybody hear me? The internet's going great. Making a double check. Everything good? Good. Going good. All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Let's get started then. All right. I'm going back some, so leave where you're at, Joe. I'm just going back. Class consciousness plays a special role in the development of class society because the development of class consciousness by the revolutionary class is a prerequisite to social revolution. Marx cautioned that we must not make mistakes. We must not mistake the necessity for class consciousness in preceding social revolutions for the idealist position. The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism by weapons. Material forces must be overthrown by material forces. But theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. Theory is capable of gripping the masses as soon as it demonstrates ad hominem, and it demonstrates an ad hominem as soon as it becomes radical. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter. When Marx says that theory must grip the masses ad hominem, he means that the theory must manifest in the actual life conditions and consciousness activities of the masses. It is not enough for the masses to simply be aware of its own class position and their historical mission to enact social revolution. They must bring these ideas to life by building institutions capable of revolutionary struggle. Of these institutions, the most important is the state because it allows a class to control the means of production. In order to build a state which represents its own class interests, advanced elements of the revolutionary class must build a revolutionary institution, i.e. a revolutionary party and a corresponding revolutionary ideology, i.e. revolutionary theory. To make class consciousness a material force, revolutionary theory must serve to develop and to instill class consciousness. Widely within the revolutionary class, and a party is necessary to allow advanced elements of the revolutionary class to struggle and enact social revolution. As Lenin explained in What Is There to Be Done? Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. The role of the vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by the party that is guided by the most advanced theory. If the objective economic conditions of society demand it, i.e. if the economic base is no longer suitable with the superstructure of society, then eventually through the construction of revolutionary theory, which is put into practice by a revolutionary party, the revolutionary class will eventually develop revolutionary theory and the revolutionary party which will guide the masses to a new stage of development. The revolutionary class will become the new ruling class. This process of development reflects the law of suitability, which is discussed in a militant agreement for the uprising. Lenin explained that in our present age, a precondition of social revolution by the working class is the development of Marxist party, Workers' Party. We see in the independent, uncompromisingly Marxist party of the revolutionary proletariat the sole pledge of socialism's victory and the road to victory that is most free from vacillations. Vacillations mean going for being wishy-washy, basically. It must also be understood that social revolution, wait, did I read that? Yeah, no. It must also be understood that a social revolution cannot be fully secured until a dictatorship of the proletariat is formed via the construction of the state, which is controlled by the working class. This will give the workers and a commanding position over the capitalist class, which gives workers control over the means of production. In doing so, political revolution is developed into economic revolution. This allows human societies to advance to the next stage of development in accordance with the laws and principles of historical materialism and social formation theory. Bearing all this in mind, The historical mission of the working class can be summarized as follows. Advanced elements of the working class must build a revolutionary party and develop corresponding revolutionary theory. This superstructural configuration of institutions and ideology must be used to develop class consciousness among the working masses and guide them to revolution. This revolution must result in the construction of a worker state, which can bring about the dictatorship of the proletariat. Only through the dictatorship of the proletariat can workers fulfill the historic mission of ending class society once and for all. Ending capitalism will require a high development of class consciousness among the working class. Until the working class develops class consciousness on the mass level, social revolution and the overthrowing of the ruling class of capitalists will remain impossible, despite the fact that the material conditions have already been in place since Marx and Engels were alive. Understanding the role of social consciousness in human society and the role of revolutionary theory and the revolutionary party in the arena of class struggle is therefore a vital importance in the studying of both historical materialism and scientific socialism. Historical materialism analyzes its concern with processes of development in both social being and social consciousness of human society, while scientific socialism is concerned with the practice of developing the working class in order to bring about social revolution and the end to capitalism. And the prevailing social ideology affects the consciousness of all classes in social life. According to Marx and Engels, the class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. In the full passage from which the above quotation is taken, Marx explains in detail the process by which the ideas of the ruling class becomes predominant in class society. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e. the class which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideal of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas, hence, of the relationship which makes the one class the ruling one. Therefore, the ideas of this dominance, the individual composing the ruling class possess, among other things, consciousness, and therefore think. Insofar, therefore, oh my gosh, another restriction, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. The ruling one, therefore, the ideas of its dominance, the individual composing the ruling class possesses, among other things, consciousness, and therefore thinks. Insofar, therefore, as they rule as a class of and determine the extent and compass of an epoch, it is self-evident that they do this in its whole range. Hence, among other things, rule also as thinkers and as producers of ideas, and regulate the production of distribution of ideas and their age. Thus, their ideas are the ruling ideas of the epoch. For instance, in an age and in a country where royal power, aristocracies, and bourgeoisie are contending for mastery and where, therefore, mastery is shared, the doctrine of the separations of powers prove to be the dominant idea and is expressed as an internal law. Oh, sweet. In other words, The consciousness of the ruling class is rooted in the material relations of production of society and thus reflects the dominance of the ruling class. Marx goes on to explain how some individuals become dedicated ideologists tasked with systemizing the ideas of the ruling class to higher levels of theoretical consciousness. The division of labor, which we already saw above as one of the chief forces of history, up till now manifests itself also in the ruling class as a division of mental and material labor, so that inside this class, one part appears as the thinkers of the class, its active, competitive ideologists who make the perfecting of the illusion of the class about itself their chief source of livelihood, while the other's attitude is these ideas and illusions is more passive and receptive because they are in reality the active members of this class and have less time to make up illusions and ideas about themselves. Marx then introduces the concept of revolutionary class consciousness. The existence of revolutionary ideas in a particular period presupposes the existence of a revolutionary class. Why did Aziz drop? Oh, Aziz, okay. Here, Marx is referring to the fact that before revolutionary ideas can be generated, material conditions for those must first be presented. These material conditions arise from the development of an economic class which would be better suit the newly developed productive forces. This new revolutionary class will eventually develop consciousness and its own existence and its own revolutionary potential. And this class consciousness will eventually lead to social revolution, in which the revolutionary class seize control of the means of production and build a state to enforce its rule. These revolutionary classes emerge from the material development which takes place in the social being of human society. Before a revolutionary class can take power and usher in a new stage of development of class society, a new mode of production, they must first stage a social revolution. Before a social revolution can be carried out, the class consciousness of revolutionary class must be developed to a high level. We have a picture, everybody. Love these pictures. Okay. So on top, we have consciousness arises from the material conditions. Matter, pre-existence, impacts consciousness, secondary existence. Dialectical materialist viewpoint of relationships between matter and consciousness. Class consciousness arises from economic classes. Revolutionary economic classes arise revolutionary ideas. Primary existence, secondary existence. Historical materialist viewpoint of origins of revolutionary consciousness. Thank you. Marx's observation that the revolutionary ideas stem from social beings as a basis in the dialectical materialist conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. Class consciousness, therefore, is the social consciousness of a particular class in society, pertaining to itself and its relations to other classes and the means of production. As a revolutionary class comes to cement its power over class society, the class consciousness of the new ruling class becomes the predominant consciousness of all of society. This begins to shift, however, as the productive forces develop and eventually reach a point of development which makes them no longer compatible with the relations of production. At this point, a new revolutionary class emerges and class consciousness begins to develop based on the material development of the productive forces. Next, Marx explains how each stage of development and the mode of production and the relations of production leads to dominant social consciousness, which must present itself as more universal to justify the position of a new ruling class. Marx also critiques historians who do not consider the material conditions which gives rise to the philosophies and ideas of any given era of human society. If now in considering the course of history, we detach the ideas of the ruling class from the ruling class itself and attribute to them an independent existence, if we confine ourselves to saying that these or those ideas are dominant at a given time without bothering ourselves about the conditions of production and the producers of these ideas, if we thus ignore the individual and world conditions, which are the source of the ideas, we can say, for instance, that during the time that the aristocracy was dominant, the concepts, honor, loyalty, etc., were dominant during the dominance of the bourgeoisie, the concept of freedom, equality, etc. The ruling class itself, on the whole, images this to be so. This conception of history, which is common to all historians, particularly since the 18th century, will necessarily come up against the phenomenon that in increasingly abstract ideas hold sway, i.e., ideas which increasingly take on the form of universality from each new class, which puts itself in the place of one ruling before it. It compelled merely in order to carry through its aim, to represent its interest as a common interest of all the members of society, that is, expressed in ideal form. It has to give its ideas the form of universality and represent them as the only rational, universally valid ones. The class makes a revolutionary appears from the very start, if only because it is opposed to a class, not a class, but as a representative of the whole of society. It appears as the whole mass of society confronting the one ruling class. It can do this because, to start with, its interest really is more connected with the common interests of all other non-ruling classes, because under the pressure of hitherto existing conditions, its interest is not yet been able to develop as a particular interest of a particular class. Its victory, therefore, benefits also many individuals of the other classes which are not winning a dominant position, but only insofar as it now puts these individuals in a position to raise themselves into the ruling class. When the French bourgeoisie overthrew the power of the aristocracy, it thereby made it possible for many proletarians to raise themselves above the proletariat, but only insofar as they became bourgeoisie. Where'd you go, Joe? Be right back, I promise. Okay. No worries. I don't know. Finally, Marx explains how processes will eventually result in an end to class society. Again, finally, Marx explains how this process will eventually result in the end of class society. Once the proletariat working class is able to successfully enact social revolution and overtake the capitalist class, there will no longer be any basis for class consciousness, and social consciousness will develop along truly universal lines. Just making sure I didn't miss them. All right. Okay. Every new class, therefore, achieves its hegemony only on the broader basis than that of the class ruling previously, whereas the position of the non-ruling class against the new ruling class later develops all the more sharply and profoundly. Both of these things determine the fact that the struggle to be waged against the new ruling class, in its turn, aims at the more decided radical negation of the previous condition of society than could only previous classes which sought to rule. This whole semblance that the rule of a certain class is only the rule of certain ideas comes to a natural end, of course, as soon as class rule in general ceases to be the form in which society is organized. That is to say, as soon as it is no longer necessary to represent a particular interest as general or the general interest as ruling. Next, Marx discuss the idealist conception of history. Historians in a class society tend to function as ideologists for the ruling class. This leads to three efforts which historians undertake. Thank you, Joe. I'm sorry I didn't see you. Undertake to make it seem as though ideas are driving forces of history. In this way, the ruling class is better able to justify its own position by convincing the oppressed classes that the idea of the ruling class are superior and that those ideas are what drives history, as opposed to material processes and developments in the material base of human society. According to Marx, in order to promote such an idealist interpretation of history, the ideologists of the ruling class must accomplish the following three tasks. Number one, separate the ideas of those ruling for empirical reasons, under empirical conditions, and as empirical individuals from these actual rulers, and thus recognize the rule of ideas or illusions in history. In other words, historians who serve the agenda of the ruling class must draw a distinction between the human beings who rule over society as a ruling class and the ideas which they conceive to justify their own position of power over society. By separating the ideas from the humans themselves, one can ignore the power they have in terms of the material relations of production. This enables an ideologist to pretend that the ideas themselves overrule society and advance humanity forward then. In reality, it is the material dominance of the ruling class over the means of production which enables them to push their agenda forward through material processes. Number two, bringing an order into this rule of ideas, prove all mystical connections among the successive ruling ideas, which is managed by understanding them as acts of self-determination on the part of the concept. This is possible because by virtue of their empirical basis, these ideas are really connected with one another. And because conceiving is mere ideas, they become self-distinctions, distinctions made by thought, idealism. In other words, it is necessary to develop a theoretical system of the opposed ruling ideas over society. These systems of thought must be formulated and convince the oppressed classes that the best ideas are the ones that will rise to the top and advance society forward. Once this idea of the rule of ideas is established, then the ideas of the ruling class must be mystically connected to the ideas which best serve the agenda of the ruling class. As an example, under capitalism, the ideologists often refer to the free market of ideas as a theoretical system which advanced society forward. These same ideologists then associate ideas with justified capitalism as, quote, winning in the free market of ideas. In this manner, workers can be convinced that capitalists rule over society not because they have the most wealth, power, and control over the means of production, but because their ideas have won in the free market of ideas. This is necessary to keep workers from realizing the true nature and the underlying material base which keeps capitalists in power, and to prevent workers from developing revolutionary class consciousness, which might threaten the power and the position of the ruling class. Number three, to remove the mystical appearance of this, quote, self-determining concept, end quote. It is changed into a person, quote, self-consciousness, end quote. Or to appear thoroughly materialistic, into a series of persons who represent the, quote, concept in his history, into the thinkers and philosophers, the ideologists, who again are understood as the manufacturers of history, as the, quote, council of guardians, as the rulers. Thus, the whole body of materialistic elements have been removed from history, and now full reign can be given to the speculative seed. In other words, it is necessary to make the imagined system of the ruling ideas, of the rule of ideas, seems less mystical and more grounded in reality. In order to make the rule of ideas and the dominance of the ideas of the ruling class seems more realistic and acceptable to the oppressed class, historians must fabricate groups of individuals who are thinkers in society. These thinkers are then described as features in human society who advance history forward and determine the course of development of human society. In this way, the material process, which actually determined the development of human history, can be counseled, and the oppressed classes can be made to believe that the ideas of the ruling class are the best ideas formulated by the best thinkers. Next, Marx sarcastically explains that historians who develop such idealist conceptions of history can't seem to accomplish the trivial insight, the distinguishing between that people think of themselves and who they actually are. Whilst in the ordinary life, every shopkeeper is very well able to distinguish between that somebody professes to be and what he really is. Our historians have not yet won even this trivial insight. They take every epic at its word and believe that everything it says and imagines about itself is true. Finally, Marx explains that these idealist conceptions of history are only one component of the ideological program of the ruling class. This historical method, and especially the reason why it was formulated, must be understood from this connection with the illusion of ideologists in general, i.g., the illusion of the jurist politician, of the practical statesman among them too, from the dogmatic dreaming and distortion of these fellows. This is explained perfectly, easily from the practical position in life, their job, and the division of labor. In similar, class society produces historians, politicians, and other such ideologists to develop systems of theoretical consciousness and ideologies which promote, defend, and advance the position and the agenda of the ruling class. This is to conceal the fact the ruling class only has power over society because of the material conditions and processes which give them dominance over the means of production. It is, however, possible for the oppressed class to develop class consciousness and their own, and once this consciousness has developed to a high enough level to enact social revolution and take control over the means of production. In terms of the mode of capitalism, in terms of modern capitalism, this is very important to understand for those wishing to liberate the working class. As the working class comes to see a false consciousness which the capitalist class impose upon society, they will begin to develop a class consciousness of their own. Once a high enough level of class consciousness develops, then the resulting social revolution over the capitalist class will eventually lead to the end of class society altogether. This will allow humans to develop social consciousness, which universally reflects the will of people in general without one class dominating and ruling over society. This makes the historical mission of the working class especially important, since only the working class can bring the end to class society. Did you want to do notes?
I have some notes from the reading today.
Sweet. I will go on mute and you will give out the notes, because that's the end of that section.
All right. Bookmarks. Delete. Okay, 153 is where we started. And Lenin said, and so Lenin said unto the masses, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. The role of the vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. It must also be understood that social revolution cannot be fully secured until a dictatorship of the proletariat is formed via the construction of a state which is controlled by the working class. Only through the dictatorship of the proletariat can workers fulfill the historical mission of ending class society once and for all. Then some little definitions. Historical materialism analysis is concerned with processes of development in both social being and social consciousness of human society, while scientific socialism is concerned with the practice of developing the working class in order to bring about social revolution and an end to capitalism. And then Marx says, the ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas, hence the relationships which make the one class the ruling one, therefore the ideas of its dominance. And then Marx said, the existence of revolutionary ideas in a particular period presupposes the existence of a revolutionary class. Then we looked at some pictures, and Marx's observation that revolutionary ideas stem from social being has a basis in the dialectical materialist conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. Class consciousness, therefore, is the social consciousness of a particular class in society pertaining to itself and its relations to other classes and the means of production. And then Marx said, if now, in considering the course of history, we detach the ideas of the ruling class from the ruling class itself and attribute to them an independent existence, if we confine ourselves to saying that these or those ideas were dominant at a given time without bothering ourselves about the conditions of production and the producers of those ideas, if we thus ignore the individuals and world conditions which are the source of the ideas, we can say, for instance, that during the time that the aristocracy was dominant, the concepts honor, loyalty, etc., were dominant during the dominance of the bourgeoisie, the concepts freedom, equality, etc. And then Marx made, the ideologists of the ruling class must accomplish the three following tasks. So we must accomplish these tasks to become the ruling class. 1. Separate the ideas of those ruling for empirical reasons under empirical conditions and as empirical individuals from these actual rulers, and thus recognize the rule of ideas or illusions in history. 2. Bring an order into this rule of ideas. Prove a mystical connection among the successive ruling ideas, which is managed by understanding them as, quote, acts of self-determination on the part of the concept. This is possible because by virtue of their empirical basis, these ideas are really connected with one another, and because conceived as mere ideas, they become self-distinctions, distinctions made by thought. And 3, to remove the mystical appearance of this, quote, self-determining concept, it is changed into a person, self-consciousness, or to appear thoroughly materialistic into a series of persons who represent the, quote, concept in history thanks into the, quote, thinkers, the, quote, philosophers, the ideologists, who again are understood as the manufacturers of history, as the, quote, council of guardians, as the rulers. Thus, the whole body of materialistic elements has been removed from history, and now full rein can be given to the speculative steed. Okay, in summary, of this point, class society produces historians, politicians, and other such ideologists to develop systems of theoretical consciousness and ideologies which promote, defend, and advance the position and agenda of the ruling class. This is to conceal the fact that the ruling class only has power over society because of the material conditions and processes which give them dominance over the means of production. And then, in terms of modern capitalism, this is very important to understand for those wishing to liberate the working class. As the working class comes to see the false consciousness which the capitalist class imposes upon society, they will begin to develop a class consciousness of their own. And the last thing I thought was important was only the working class can bring an end to class society. That's all the notes I have so far.
Thank you, thank you. Now we're on section 2. The decisive role of social being and the determining of social consciousness. One of the greatest accomplishments of Marx and Engels was the development of materialism to its peak and the construction of materialist viewpoint of history. This materialist conception of history scientifically solved the problem and the formation and development of social consciousness. Marx and Engels have thus proven the following statement to be true. Statement 1. The mental life of society, social consciousness, is formed and developed on the basis of material life, social being. Number 2. The source of social ideology and the social psychology cannot be found within social consciousness and social psychology. Number 3. The source of social consciousness and social psychology is found not within the human mind, but in physical reality. As Marx wrote in his preface of the Critique of Political Economy, neither legal relationships nor political form could be comprehended, whether by themselves or on the basis of a so-called general development of the human mind, but on the contrary, they originate from the material conditions of life. It is not the consciousness of men that determine their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is the basis of the law of the relationship between the social being and social consciousness, which states that social being determines social consciousness, while it is also possible for social consciousness to impact back upon the material reality and social being. This law of historical materialism has an objective basis in the dialectical materialist conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. The law of the relationship between social being and social consciousness is further explained in the German ideology by Marx and Engels. The production of ideas, the conception of consciousness, is at first directly interwoven with the material activity and the material intercourse of men. The language of life, conceiving, thinking, and material intercourse of men appear at this stage as a direct outflow of their material behavior. In other words, human ideology initially corresponds directly to the physical activities which take place in the real world. As these ideas develop, it can appear as though higher forms of consciousness, such as religious or political ideas, are unlinked from the material world. However, consciousness is always rooted in the material world and in the physical activity of human beings. No matter how developed consciousness might become, as Marx and Engels further explains in the German ideology, the same applies to the mental production as expressed in the language of politics, law, morality, religion, metaphysics, etc. of the people. Men are the producers of their conceptions, ideas, etc. Real, active men, as they are conditioned by the definite development of their productive forces and of the intercourse corresponding to these, up to its furthest forms. Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence and the existence of men as their actual life process. It is crucial. It is crucial to understand and the emphasis placed on the fact that ideas originate from active human beings living out actual life processes. This stands in contrast with idealist conception of human consciousness, which seeks to either separate human consciousness from the material world as other objective idealism, or to deny the existence of the material world altogether. As with subjective ideas, Marx and Engels made it clear that all consciousness is determined by the material world and the material labor activities which humans undertake to survive. Their German ideology continues. If in all ideology men and their circumstances appear upside down, as in a camera obscura, this phenomenon arises just as much from the historical life process of the inversion of objects on the retina does from their physical life process. This statement can seem confusing as it refers to the, what's that word? Antiquated optical device, the camera obscura. The camera obscura projects an image into a screen, and this projected image appears upside down. Similarly, the lens of a human eye also inverts images when projecting them into the retina as the back of the human eye. Here we go, Joe. Hey, look, it's Gabby. Everybody say hi to Gabby. So here we have the eye looking at a tree. When it comes in, it's upside down. Same thing with a camera obscura. Great. The human eye, one, projects an upside down image on the retina, just as the camera obscura projects an upside down on a screen. Thank you, Joe. Hey, Gabby. In this passage, Marx and Engels are explaining that false consciousness arises from material conditions and material life processes. In other words, since all consciousness arises from our experiences in the real world, it must be true that false consciousness arises from our experience in the real world. Some idealists, such as empiricists, may assert an inaccurate perception of reality or evidence that reality cannot be perceived with any accuracy at all. These idealists argue that human beings can only have subjective perception of the world, and that consciousness, therefore, is not determined by reality. Here, Marx explains that misperception are in and of themselves determined by material phenomenon. Just because all consciousness stems from our observation and experiences in the real world, it doesn't mean that consciousness always reflects reality accurately. Likewise, just because our consciousness does not always reflect reality accurately, that does not mean that consciousness is not determined by reality. It should also be noted here that Lenin's proof of the theory of reflection shows that human beings are capable of perceiving the material world with increasing accuracy over time, as soon as they get an experience. Yeah. To summarize, if human beings believe something that is objectively false, it must be because some objective circumstances of reality are obscuring, skewing, or altering the perception of that human being. An example of this would be workers in a capitalist society believing that capitalism is a system which they, as workers, benefit from. This skewed perception of reality is caused by the objective material conditions, namely the capitalist relations of production and the power which capitalists have over such phenomenons as education systems, media outlets, and other information sources. In short, Marx and Engels are simply saying here that all human consciousness, whether accurate or inaccurate, is determined by the material reality. The cause of change within an epoch of society cannot be accurately explained through the analysis of social consciousness of that society alone. According to Marx, one cannot judge such a period of transformation by its consciousness, but on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradictions of the material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. The above quotation is from the preface of the Critique of Political Economy by Karl Marx. The full passage gives further insight into the development of social consciousness. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production, appropriate to a given stage of development, and their material forces of production. Here, Marx explains that society is formed by humans coming together to produce that which is necessary to sustain human life: food, shelter, etc. This production is independent of human will because humans must carry out this social production, or else they will not survive. Therefore, social production processes cannot be considered a choice which human could willingly decide against undertaking. Material production is the objective need on the biological level for the continuation of the species. Next, Marx explains that the totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structures of society, the real foundation of which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. The relationship with which human beings have with one another to carry out social material processes are economic relationships. This constitutes the material/economic base of human society. The material base is what primarily derives the development of humanity. A superstructure is also developed based on social consciousness, which reflects the material base. Marx continues. I'm glad you love it. The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is the basis of social formation theory, which is the key to understanding relationships between the material base and the superstructure of society. Social economic production, i.e., the material/economic base, determines the superstructure of society. The superstructure can also impact the material base. The law of suitability between the relations of production and the productive forces dictates that development in the productive forces leads to social revolution, which in turn allows for society to move on to the next stage of development. Social revolution, according to Marx, is a process by which the superstructure undergoes a quality shift, and the formerly predominant ruling class is superseded by a new ruling class, the proletariat. This change and development begins with material conditions. Its productive forces grow to such an extent that they are no longer capable with relations of production, and this determines a contradiction in social consciousness. As new classes emerge, which are more compatible with the new higher level of productive forces, eventually, the new developing social consciousness of the new ruling class develops to such a level that they undertake social revolution and overthrow the old ruling class of society. As Marx puts it in the Critique of Political Economy. Excuse me, everybody. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. This reflects the law of the base determining the superstructure of society. Thus, we see that human society develops in the definite direction, with the development of productive forces driving the development of relations of production, which drives the development of the base, which drives the development of the superstructure and society at large. This reflects the dialectical materialist position that matter determines consciousness, as Marx goes on to explain. In studying such transformation, it is always necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and the illegal, political, religious, artistic, and philosophic, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out, just as one does not judge an individual, but what he thinks about himself. So, on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradiction of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. No social order is ever destroyed before all the productive forces for which is sufficient have been developed. The new superior relations of production never replace older ones before the material conditions for their existence have matured within the framework of the old society. This refutes idealists and metaphysical perspectives of human society and consciousness. Social consciousness does not develop in isolation, in of itself, metaphysically distinct from the material base of society. Rather, social consciousness develops in the dialectical unity with social being, reflecting the dialectical materialist conception of relationship between matter and consciousness. The above materialist point of view is opposed. Yeah, we're reading from a textbook, from Vietnamese textbook. 1. Social being determines social consciousness. 2. Social consciousness is a reflection of social being. And 3. Social consciousness is dependent on social beings. The idealist worldview holds that human consciousness is a primary driving force to change the development in the world. Idealism ignores or downplays the importance of material processes and material conditions in determining human consciousness. Idealist conception of history are further discussed. Historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialist philosophy and methodologies to the analysis of human society and human history. This viewpoint of history has revolutionized the way we understand the development of human society and our understanding of social consciousness and its relationship to the material world. By properly identifying the relationships between social beings and social consciousness, historical materialism has transformed history into a scientific subject which can be studied on the objective and material basis. Idealism leads to fundamental misunderstandings about the development of humanity. Idealist ideology holds that philosophy can and should be studied independently of social production processes and in the material being of humanity. Disseminating idealist ideology to the oppressed classes also helps to cement the powers of the ruling class. And we have a picture, everybody. Fun pictures. So idealist perspectives of human history development, focuses on the development of ideas of the ruling class. Historical materialist perspectives of human history, social being determines social consciousness. Social consciousness impacts the social being. Examine the dialectical development of social being and social consciousness. The idealist perspective of human history holds that human ideas shape the development of human society. Historical materialism perceives human history as a process of dialectical developments, which is driven by the relationship between social being and social consciousness. Thank you, Joe. We like pictures, everybody. Historical materialism allows for a much more accurate understanding of the development process of humanity, including both social beings, social consciousness. Historical materialism also serves the oppressed working class within the context of our present capitalist society, because it teaches workers how to understand that relationship between the economic base and the superstructure of society, and it shows that an end to capitalism is inevitable. Armed with this knowledge and a scientific understanding of human society, history, workers can better develop class consciousness, fight false consciousness, which contrived by the ruling class, and build towards social revolution. That will put workers in command of human society. This will eventually lead to a stateless, classless society, which will allow humans to collectively decide our own destinies as a species once and for all. Whenever aspects of social beings, especially the mode of production, change aspects of social consciousness, ideas and theories of society, the view of politics, the rule of law, philosophy, ethics, culture, art, etc., will change accordingly. Therefore, in different historical periods, the theories, opinions, and social ideas which arise from all determined by the conditions of the material life, i.e., social being. The historical materialist viewpoint of the origins of social consciousness also asserts that social beings determine consciousness, not in a simple and a direct way, but often through human intermediate stages. Not every thought, concept, or theory of social consciousness clearly and directly reflects the economic relations of the times, and only by seeking a comprehensive perspective can we see clearly the economic relations, i.e. social being, which are reflected in these ideas, i.e. social consciousness. Human society is defined by an incredibly complex network of internal and external relationships. Such complexity means social consciousness could not possibly be entirely determined by the material base. Social consciousness can determine primarily by the material/economic base, but there are countless other factors which affect social consciousness. Such factors include remnants of ideology from previous modes of production, as well as emerging social consciousness related by emerging classes which might eventually become the ruling class. For example, in our current capitalist society, there are still many remnants of social consciousness left over from feudal societies, impacting the social consciousness of today. Medieval literature is still studied. Certain remnants of feudal landlords class still exist in many nations and generate ideas which reflect their remnant class identity. And there are many workers who have already attained class consciousness and are beginning to strive towards social revolution and the overthrowing of capitalism. This means that a comprehensive perspective must be sought to understand social consciousness, almost did it, in all its complexities, as well as the historical perspectives, to understand how social consciousness is constantly changing and developing. Recognizing the complexity of social consciousness and its relationship with the material base allows historical materialism analysis to yield a much more accurate perception of reality than mechanical materialists' conception of history. And we'll stop there and we'll go to the notes.
All right, let's see. Hold on, hitting wrong buttons. That's what I get for eating while I'm trying to do this. All right. Okay, the decisive role of social being in determining social consciousness. One of the great accomplishments of Marx and Engels was the development of materialism to its peak and the construction of a materialist viewpoint of history. This materialist conception of history scientifically solved the problem of the formation and development of social consciousness. Marx and Engels have thus proven the following statements to be true. The mental life of society, which is social consciousness, is formed and developed on the basis of material life, which is social being. The source of social ideology and social psychology cannot be found within social consciousness and social psychology. The source of social consciousness and social psychology is found not within the human mind, but in physical reality. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is the basis for the law of the relationship between the social being and social consciousness, which states that social being determines social consciousness, while it is also possible for social consciousness to impact back upon material reality and social being. And then, in other words, human ideology initially corresponds directly to physical activity, which takes place in the real world. And consciousness is always rooted in the material world and in physical activity of human beings. Marx and Engels made it clear that all consciousness is determined by the material world and material labor activities which humans undertake to survive. And then Marx explains that misperceptions are, in and of themselves, determined by material phenomena. Just because all consciousness stems from our observations and experiences in the real world, that does not mean that consciousness always reflects reality accurately. If a human being believes something that is objectively false, it must be because some objective circumstances of reality are obscuring, skewing, or altering the perceptions of that human being. Like here in America, propaganda and our education system. All human consciousness, whether accurate or inaccurate, is determined by material reality. And Marx said, society is formed by humans coming together to produce that which is necessary to sustain food, to sustain human life, food, shelter, etc. And then Marx said, the totality of these relations of production constitutes the totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation, on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. A superstructure is also developed based on social consciousness, which reflects the material base. Socioeconomic production, i.e. the material economic base, determines the superstructure of society. The superstructure can also impact back on the material base. The law of suitability between the relations of production and productive forces dictates that developments in the productive forces lead to social revolution, which in turn allows for society to move on to the next stage of development. Social revolution is a process by which the superstructure undergoes a quality shift and the formerly predominant ruling class is superseded by a new ruling class. This change in development begins with material contradiction, as productive forces grow to such an extent that they are no longer compatible with the relations of production. And this determines a contradiction in social consciousness. As new classes emerge, which are more compatible with the new, higher level of productive forces. Okay, the materialist point of view is opposed to the idealist view of society, which seeks the origin of consciousness within consciousness itself, which it's not. Considers consciousness to be the source of all social phenomena, which determine social development. Presents history as a developing process of social consciousness without considering of social being. But the historical materialist point of view completely inverts the idealist point of view by affirming that social being determines social consciousness. Social consciousness is a reflection of social being, and social consciousness is dependent on social being. The idealist worldview holds that human consciousness is the primary driving force of change and development in the world. Idealism ignores or downplays the importance of material processes and material conditions in determining human consciousness. Historical materialism, that viewpoint of history, has revolutionized the way we understand the development of human society and our understanding of social consciousness and its relationship to the material world. The idealist perspective of human history holds that human ideas shape the development of human society. Historical materialism perceives human history as a process of dialectical development, which is driven by the relationship between social being and social consciousness. Historical materialism allows for a much more accurate understanding of the development processes of humanity, including both social being and social consciousness. And historical materialism also serves the oppressed working classes, and an end to capitalism is inevitable. I like that line, so I highlighted it. Human society is defined by an incredibly complex network of internal and external relationships. Social consciousness is determined primarily by the material economic base, but there are countless other factors which affect social consciousness. Recognizing the complexity of social consciousness and its relationship with the material base allows historical materialist analysis to yield a much more accurate perception of reality than mechanical materialist conceptions of history.
All right, thank you. Section 2, the relative independence of social consciousness. The dialectical materialist viewpoint of society, i.e. historical materialism, affirms that social being determines the social consciousness, but also clarifies that social consciousness maintains relative independence from social being based on the following evidence. 1. Social consciousness is often out of date compared to social being. 2. Social consciousness can surpass social being. 3. Social consciousness maintains the characteristics of inheritance in its own development. 4. The interplay between forms of social consciousness and their development. Social consciousness can affect social beings. Number 5. Here's a picture. I don't know why we're doing this, but it's okay. It's a little picture. It says, culture is rooted in steady development. Build a healthy culture environment for the steady development of the nation. That's it. All right. All of these points relate to dialectical materialism conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. Human society exists as an incredibly complicated dialectical unity between social being and social consciousness. This complexity is made exponentially greater by the fact that all of the countless internal aspects of both social being and social consciousness in turn have a dialectical relationship with one another. All right, here we go. We got human society, social being, and then social consciousness. They impact each other. Human society is defined by an incredibly complex system of relationships between aspects of social beings and aspects of social consciousness. So the cars and things are social beings, and there is what we get from the social consciousness. All right. This is why a comprehensive perspective is vital for anyone hoping to understand the natural development of human society. We must always keep in mind when analyzing human society that developments between any two things, phenomena, or ideas exist as mutual development. At any time one aspect of human society impacts any other aspect of human society, the same is true in the opposite direction. This concept of mutual development is explained. This applies equally to aspects of social beings and aspects of social consciousness. And because the vast system of dialectically interacting relationships between all aspects of human society is so complex, some changes can be very indirect. For example, we can look at the development of a smartphone. This invention had far-reaching impacts into countless aspects of both social beings and social consciousness of human society. In terms of social being, smartphones have changed material conditions of human beings in many ways. For instance, a great many factories, mines, and raw materials and other infrastructures might be built to sustain the global systems of billions of smartphones. Entire industries of smartphones, accessories, such as chargers, portable power banks, phone cases, etc., have sprung up. New jobs related to building and developing smartphones and related software have also been developed around the world. These are just some of the ways in which the inventions of a smartphone can change the economic base and social being of human society. At the same time, the invention of a smartphone has changed social consciousness in countless ways. In many countries, the majority of people spend hours every day using their smartphones. Content designed for smartphones has had far-reaching impact into art categories such as film and video, music and literature. Apps for smartphones have changed the way many people perform their jobs, hobbies, and social activities. Nearly every aspect of human consciousness can be impacted in some way by smartphones. And all of this activity has also mutually impacted back upon smartphones themselves. As more people use smartphones for photography and video, the hardware and software has developed to include more features and capabilities. As more people use their smartphones to listen to music and videos throughout the day, technology have developed to make wearing headphones more convenient and comfortable. The social being of smartphone technology has been impacted over time by social consciousness in terms of how humans use smartphones in their daily lives. So here you go. All technologies, arts and media, the smartphones in the center, social beings, and all social consciousness. Smartphones exist in dialectical unity with all other aspects of human society. Thank you. Smartphone technology in and of itself was developed through the mutual development of various aspects of social being, social consciousness. Advancements in many scientific and technological fields had to be made before smartphones could be invented. Wireless access to high-speed internet connections, for example, were a prerequisite for smartphone technology, in addition to technologies like touchscreens and small, high-capacity batteries. In addition, human social consciousness had to develop before smartphones could ever been considered a viable technology. The internet had to become a phenomenon that was prominent in human social consciousness in order for the demand for a smartphone with its internet access capabilities to become so ubiquitous. The development of the smartphone was also impacted by such aspects of social consciousness and demand for internet content, the need for new forms of communication such as video calling, and so on. Social being has determined the social consciousness as it relates to the development of smartphone technology. To put it another way, the material reality of smartphone technology determines how humans think about them. This includes the origins of and development of this technology. Before the prerequisite technologies, such as the internet, touchscreens, etc., were developed, it would have been nearly impossible for human beings to imagine the technology of the internet capable smartphone and possible to engineer such a device. This does not mean, of course, that human beings are incapable of speculating about our imaging technology before they are developed. However, what a human being is capable of imagining is determined by the material conditions that presently exist. In science fiction in the 1960s and 70s, for example, people could imagine and speculate about handheld communications and computer technology because similar and prerequisite technologies such as phones and computers already exist at that time. These same ideas could not have developed in more ancient times when such related technologies did not yet exist anywhere in social beings of human society. Thank you. the relationship between, it's good to see you. The relationship between human beings and smartphones is just one of the virtually infinite numbers of relationships which define human society. Grasping the complexity of nature of the relationship between and within social beings and social consciousness is vital for understanding what is and is not possible for human society. We must understand the essential relationships which define something, including its history of development, before we can consciously change it. This is why historical materialism demands that we seek a comprehensive and historical perspective in studying and attempt to transfer human society. Do you want me to stop there? Do you have lots of notes?
I've got some notes.
Okay, so you want me to stop here?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. The relative independence of social consciousness. The dialectical materialist viewpoint of society, i.e., historical materialism, affirms that social being determines social consciousness, but also clarifies that social consciousness maintains relative independence from social being based on the following evidence. 1. Social consciousness is often out of date compared to social being. 2. Social consciousness can surpass social being. 3. Social consciousness maintains the character of inheritance and its own development. 4. The interplay between forms of social consciousness and their development. 5. Social consciousness can affect social being. Human society exists as an incredibly complicated dialectical unity between social being and social consciousness. This complexity is made exponentially greater by the fact that all of the countless internal aspects of both social being and social consciousness in turn also have dialectical relationships with each other. Hold on, I got a cough. Okay. Human society is defined by an incredibly complex system of relationships between aspects of social being and aspects of social consciousness. We must always keep in mind when analyzing human society that development between any two things, phenomena or ideas, exists as mutual development. That's where they develop together. Social being has determined social consciousness. Because social being determines social consciousness. So that's what happened with the phone. However, okay, so I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I wasn't supposed to highlight however. What a human being is capable of imagining is determined by the material conditions that presently exist. And then grasping the complexity and nature of the relationships between and within social being and social consciousness is vital for understanding what is and is not possible in human society. We must understand the essential relationships which define something, including its history of development, before we can consciously change it. This is why historical materialism demands that we seek a comprehensive and historical perspective in studying and attempting to transform human society.
We got one more we can do. It's only a couple pages. Social consciousness often lags behind social being. The principle that social beings determine social consciousness asserts that changes in social being will inevitably lead to changes in social consciousness, as the old social consciousness is negated and give rise to a new social consciousness. However, in some cases, the transformation of social being does not immediately lead to the transformation of social consciousness. And on the contrary, many factors of social consciousness in both social psychology and social ideology can persist for a very long time, even if its originating social being was being negated. Not all factors of the new social consciousness will arise immediately as soon as the new social being has developed. This is because social consciousness is only a reflection of social being. In general, social consciousness only changes after social being has changed, because the strong, frequent, and direct impact of practical activities changes it to social being, taking place at such a fast speed that human consciousness cannot keep up with it. Habits, traditions, and customs, as well as the backwardness and conservatism of some forms of social consciousness tend to be very strong. Social consciousness is always associated with the interests of certain groups of people in certain classes in history. Therefore, old and outdated ideas are often maintained and propagated by the anti-progressive social forces to fight against progressive social forces. The theory of consciousness reflection and materialist dialectics was conceived of by Marx and Engels and was later expanded and developed by Lenin and other communist theories. This theory proposes that consciousness thought is reflection of material reality, which develops and results from material life processes. These material life processes include the motion and activities of human beings in the material world, as well as the motion and development which occurs within the physical human being. The theory of reflection thus adheres to dialectical materialism, conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness, which holds that consciousness is determined by material life processes and can be impacted back on the material world through conscious activity. And the theory of reflection also extends to human society and social consciousness. Social beings and social consciousness shares the same relationship as individuals being the consciousness. Social consciousness reflects social being, and it's determined by social being and can impact upon social being. The development of social consciousness reflects our relationship with the material world, and this reflection are incredibly implicated and dynamic. In this conceptus of Hegel's Science and Logic, Lenin wrote that cognition is the internal, endless approximation of thought to the object. The reflection of nature in man's thought must be understood not lifelessly, not abstractly, devoid of movement, not without contradiction, but in the internal process of movement, the arising of contradictions and their solutions. When contradictions arise from social being, they will eventually manifest in social consciousness. But this is not necessarily an immediate response. For example, when capitalists first began to emerge as a new ruling class, their ideology did not immediately become the predominant ideology all across the world at once, in an instant. In many ways, the outmoded feudal ideology remained dominant long after capitalists became the predominant class. In some cases, this outmoded feudal remnants of consciousness persist to this day. There are even some nations today which are still ruled by feudal-style monarchs, despite having a capitalist dominant economy. In those countries, feudal-era ideology still plays a large role in the superstructure of society. There are many other such examples of social consciousness lagging behind social being, such as elements of a conservative culture or traditional values which stem from earlier stages of development and mode of production. Ho Chi Minh explains that one of the missions of a communist is to negate reactionary, obsolete, or false consciousness from the working class while developing revolutionary class consciousness. As an example from history, under French colonization and Japanese occupation, Vietnamese culture had been heavily suppressed for several decades. As such, Vietnamese revolutionaries were trying to determine which aspects of traditional Vietnamese culture should be restored and preserved. In a speech in 1958, Ho Chi Minh discussed the manner in which Vietnamese communists should engage with traditional Vietnamese culture. When we talk about restoring old things, we mean to restore good aspects and factors of those things while removing bad aspects and bad factors. We should restore, then develop good aspects and factors and elements and eliminate bad ones. In the article called "To Become a Good Cadre, One Must Practice Self-Criticism," written in 1945, Ho Chi Minh pointed out the necessity of constantly reviewing ideology to ensure accurate reflection of reality. This is important because reality is constantly changing in accordance with the principle of development, dialectical materialism. Ho Chi Minh wrote, "We must know the objective circumstances, change every minute of every day. A policy that might be good today could be obsolete tomorrow. If we fail to willingly criticize our own actions, to reject the obsolete and the erroneous, we will never be able to catch up with the circumstances. We will be left behind by agile people with sundered minds. Social consciousness, which lags behind social being, is considered a remnant of previous forms of human society." And before you go on, we're going to end here. On page. I'm going to let them know here real quick. On page 172, and I will mute, and you.
Okay. Alrighty. Bookmarks. All right. We're right here. Social consciousness often lags behind social being. The principle that social being determines social consciousness asserts that changes in social being will inevitably lead to changes in social consciousness, as the old social consciousness is negated and gives rise to the new social consciousness. However, in some cases, the transformation of social being does not immediately lead to the transformation of social consciousness. Not all factors of a new social consciousness will arise immediately as soon as a new social being has developed. This is because social consciousness is only a reflection of social being. In general, social consciousness only changes after social being has changed. Because of the strong, frequent, and direct impact of practical activities, changes to social being takes place at such a fast speed that human consciousness cannot keep up with it. Habits, traditions, and customs, as well as the backwardness and conservatism of some forms of social consciousness, tend to be very strong. Social consciousness is always associated with the interests of certain groups of people and certain classes in history. Therefore, old and outdated ideas are often maintained and propagated by anti-progressive social forces to fight against progressive social forces. The theory of consciousness reflected in materialist dialectics proposes that conscious thought is a reflection of material reality, which develops and results from material life processes. These material life processes include the motions and activities of human beings in the material world, as well as the motion and development which occurs within the physical human being. The theory of reflection thus adheres to the dialectical materialist conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness. And the theory of reflection also extends to human society and social consciousness. Social being and social consciousness share the same relationship as individual being and consciousness. Social consciousness reflects social being and is determined by social being and can impact back upon social being. When contradictions arise in social being, they will eventually manifest in social consciousness. There are many other such examples of social consciousness lagging behind social being, such as elements of conservative culture or traditional values which stem from earlier stages of development and modes of production. Ho Chi Minh explained that one of the missions of communists is to negate reactionary, obsolete, or false consciousness from the working class while developing revolutionary class consciousness. Reality is constantly changing in accordance with the principles of development of dialectical materialism. And social consciousness, which lags behind social being, is considered a, quote, remnant of previous forms of human society.
All right. Thank you. Does anybody want to come up and say or talk about what we just read? I'll give it a couple seconds. Anybody's welcome to come up. Thank you, Joe, for doing the notes.
No problem.
Anything you want to add by any chance? Oh, someone's coming up.
My notes were good enough for me, but someone's coming up.
Yeah, Gabby is. What up, Gabby?
Hey, I was driving, so I was paying attention to it half the time, and then half the time, focusing on driving. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Just affirming that consciousness is determined by social being in a relationship to production, and how advanced we are, and how we use the means of production, but also that social consciousness has its own characteristic and that has its own influence, and it's distinct by social being. And specifically, I find it interesting how they say how social consciousness lags behind social being. So that was interesting.
Yeah, this is pretty good stuff. I would say, it's pretty good stuff. And I've been telling everybody that this could bring a good foundation for you, as Gabby is teacupped. It could bring a good foundation for people, but you have to continue to develop and to learn new processes and to keep up with these things, So. Yep. So this is good foundational work. Later, I think Joe, I don't know when you're starting it, but Joe's going to go to part one. What day?
Tuesday at 5 o'clock.
Tuesday at 5 o'clock Central. They're going to go over part one, but they're going to go one section at a time and actually study it more. So. Yeah. So they'll probably do part two too. And then we'll be waiting on part 3, 4, and 5, because I think part 3 is either scientific socialism or political economy. I can't remember. So.
Anybody that's in here that's interested in that and is not in the reading server, please send me a message. I will send you an invite. I want everybody there that wants to be there. 5 o'clock Central.
Yeah, and it's a good thing. Also, everybody, please have critiques too. And so that way that it can be more of a lucrative conversation too, and better study, So, yeah. Oh, there goes Gabby. All right, then. Well, do you have anybody have anything else to say, or are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. I hope you all wish you a good night. I might do a live later. Good night. Good night.